Hello and welcome. I'm Melanie Ross and I will be presenting today. Thank you for joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on accreditation versus certification and conformity assessment. Please note we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for viewing in the future. Just a little bit about me before we begin. I'm a technical products developer for ANAB, creating course materials, conference talks, webinars such as this one, as well as a variety of other activities such as managing the ANAB blog. I have over 20 years of experience in quality control, quality assurance, and quality management. I also perform assessments for ANAB to several different standards, including 17025 and 17034. So with that, let's get started. Just a couple of logistics before we get into the webinar content. Due to the high attendance, everyone will remain muted during the duration of the webinar. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box. We have planned time at the end of the webinar to answer questions that are asked. And again, we are recording the webinar and it'll be posted on our website within 5 business days. So during this webinar, we're going to learn the definition of accreditation and certification. We're going to discuss the purpose of each to better understand the relationships between the two terms, as well as some of the differences between the two terms. We will discuss how to use the terms appropriately and some of the different types of accreditations and certifications available in the marketplace. We begin by asking, what is accreditation? The formal definition is third-party attestation related to a conformity assessment body conveying formal demonstration of its competence to carry out specific assessment tasks. The term accreditation is used when technical competence is required, such as testing, calibration, or inspection. Accreditation is used to confirm the conformity assessment body has the appropriate competence and management system to properly perform conformity assessment activities. Accreditation is conformity assessment by a technically competent assessor. It provides assurance that conformity assessment bodies adhere to internationally recognized standards. The assessor evaluates the management system and conformity assessment methods, or the technical system, of the conformity assessment body, or a laboratory, or inspection body, or certification body. A lot of different names there. This includes a review of the validity and appropriateness of methods, the suitability of equipment, and quality control procedures, for example. A large part of accreditation assessments is the demonstration of technical competence of conformity assessment body personnel. Why is that? Well, remember the definition of accreditation. The assessor is attesting to the competence of the conformity assessment body. So demonstrating technical competence for the assessor to observe solidifies that third-party attestation and provides confidence in the competence of the conformity assessment body. So I've used the term competence several times already in this webinar, but what is competence? It is the ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. Competence can pertain to an individual working in a laboratory, an assessor assessing an entity, the accreditation body itself, or the laboratory or entity as a whole. Competence is a key term in thinking about accreditation. Accreditation requires competence in a defined scope of activities, because remember, accreditation is third-party attestation of the competence of the entity being accredited. Now we will define conformity. Plain and simple, conformity is fulfillment of a requirement. This can be a requirement in an international standard, or a requirement in a regulation, such as a state regulation on cannabis, a customer requirement, or even a requirement within the management system. Conformity assessment bodies, such as laboratories, assess whether items fulfill requirements, whether that is through testing, inspection, calibration, or certification, for example. Conformity assessment bodies obtain accreditation for conformity assessment activities. So what is conformity assessment? It's an activity performed to verify conformance to a standard, technical specification, or other specified requirement, like we just discussed in the definition of conformity. Conformity assessment is a set of processes that demonstrate a product, service, system, or person meets requirements. Think about that statement for a second. What else is defined as a set of processes? A management system, right? The conformity assessment body has a management system based on a specified standard that contains the set of processes used in conformity assessment. This final point goes hand in hand with the definition of accreditation. Conformity assessment is the demonstration that specified requirements are fulfilled through conformity assessment activities, again, such as certification, testing, calibration, or inspection. So what are conformity assessment activities? Those include certification of organizations, persons, services, processes, and products. For example, an organization can be certified to ISO 9001 or ISO 14001. A person can be certified for a specific task or job field, such as food handler or certified Six Sigma Black Belt, for example. Now, as part of our discussion on conformity assessment, I want to take a look at the accreditation hierarchy. It begins on a global scale with ILAC and IAF, who primarily function to develop single, worldwide programs for conformity assessment. Accreditation bodies hold multilateral or mutual recognition arrangements with IAF and ILAC. These arrangements are peer evaluated in accordance with ISO IEC 17011 requirements to demonstrate competence of the accreditation body. Signatories agree to accept the results of each other's accredited conformity assessments. Next, we have regional cooperations, such as APAC and IAAC, that expand the arrangements among accreditation bodies in the specified regions. Then, on the economy level, we have the accreditation bodies. Accreditation by a recognition arrangement signatory accreditation body ensures the competence and impartiality of the conformity assessment body because the accreditation body has demonstrated competence to provide those accreditations. Then finally, we come to the conformity assessment body, which is the organization being assessed and performs conformity assessment activities for customers, whether those customers are internal or external. Conformity assessment activities again include testing, inspection, calibration, and certification. Now we'll move on to what is certification. Certification simply means conformity to requirements, again, such as conformity to ISO 9001 requirements. Remember, conformity is fulfillment of a requirement. There is a requirement in a standard, and an entity conforms to that requirement. It is third-party assurance that all or part of a management system conforms to those requirements. Listen to that word, assurance. Certification assures that an entity conforms to requirements. It is not an attestation of technical competence, as we saw in accreditation. So now we can see the relationship between accreditation and certification. The accreditation body, such as ANAB, assesses competence of a conformity assessment body, such as a laboratory, inspection body, certification body, etc. The conformity assessment body then evaluates conformity of organizations, persons, services, processes, or products. That evaluation results in a certificate, such as an ISO 9001 certificate for an organization, or a credential for a person, or a conformance report for a certified product, or a test report, calibration certificate, or inspection report, for example. Both accreditation and certification provide confidence in the services, products, or processes provided to the end user. Both provide consistent delivery and accountability, enhancing acceptance of products, services, and processes by industry with a multi-stakeholder approach. They both set standards to provide quality products and services. Usually, certification or accreditation is voluntary, but in some cases it is mandatory, such as in food safety or the cannabis industry in the United States, for example. Again, both are third-party review of conformance. Accreditation, on the other hand, goes one step further and provides a level of assurance that conformity assessment activities are accurate, reliable, and technically competent. It is an attestation of the technical competence. Certification, on the other hand, is an assurance of conformance to requirements without the technical competence component of accreditation. I've talked a lot about conformance to requirements, such as a standard, but what is a standard particularly? A standard is a document that requirements, specifications, guidelines, or characteristics that can be used consistently to ensure that materials, products, processes, and services are fit for their purpose. Standards help define the quality characteristics of a product, process, or service. Standards work to make processes similar or equal, such as tests performed by different laboratories or certifications provided by different certification bodies. There are many different types of standards. Some we are more familiar with, like the quality management system standards, such as ISO 9001, or the environmental standards, such as ISO 14001. One that has gained momentum lately is the Information Security Standard, ISO 27001, which contains requirements for managing information security. These examples are all certification standards. There are many standards on food safety, such as product certification programs accredited to ISO IEC 17065 or food safety management certification to ISO 22000. Medical device standards, such as ISO 13485, and health and safety, such as ISO 18001, are certification standards. When it gets to laboratory activities, we move into that accreditation standard, because laboratories and inspection bodies must be competent to perform conformity assessment activities. These standards include ISO IEC 17025 and ISO IEC 17020. This is just a short listing of the types of standards that are available to ensure conformance to requirements for certification, and going that one step further for attestation of competence for accreditation. Another point to keep in mind, standards are either certification standards or accreditation standards. To that point, let's delineate between management system standards and conformity assessment standards. Management system standards are sets of requirements for organizations to manage their policies and processes to achieve specified objectives. Entities conform to the requirements of the standard or standards to achieve certification. Now, when we look at conformity assessment standards, such as 17025, there are requirements in the standard for management systems, right? So conformity assessment bodies do conform to management system requirements. But again, conformity assessment standards take that one step further with the technical competence of the conformity assessment activities. So conformity assessment standards also contain activities used to ensure products, processes, persons, services, and organizations meet specified requirements. These types of standards are developed by the ISO Committee on Conformity Assessment, or ISO CASCO. The link on this slide takes you to a very good resource on conformity assessment standards and how they are used in the conformity assessment arena. A few slides back, I mentioned different types of standards. Now we see some of those standards assigned, so to speak, to accreditation or certification. Remember, certification is to management system standards. Accreditation is to conformity assessment standards. A standard is either an accreditation standard or conformity assessment standard, or it is a certification standard or management system standard. So certification goes with management system and accreditation goes with conformity assessment. Again, both accreditation and certification require an organization or entity to document their management system. Accreditation and certification both verify that the organization or entity is in conformance with the requirements defined by the standards and established and implemented management systems. Accreditation goes that one step further in attesting to the technical competence of the organization or entity. So when we talk about the conformity assessment standard, ISO IEC 17025, we are referring to accreditation. When we are talking about the Quality Management System standard, ISO 9001, we are referring to certification. Remember too, accreditation is more than just conforming to requirements. It is demonstrated competence of the conformity assessment body and its personnel. Assessors must be competent in the types of activities being assessed, since they are attesting to the competence of the conformity assessment body and its personnel. On the other hand, certification ensures the organization conforms to requirements. Now let's look at a list of the terms that have been used up to this point and assign them to accreditation and certification. So how do we use the terms appropriately? When we look at accreditation, it is an assessment. An accreditation body assigns an assessor to review and evaluate the competence of the entity subject to accreditation. The assessor attests to that competence for the entity in order to become accredited. On the other side, for certification, this is an audit. A certification body assigns an auditor to review and evaluate the conformance of the entity to specified requirements. The organization is then certified. We use assessment, assessor, and competence for accreditation, and audit, auditor, and conformance for certification. I do want to note that I have been using the term organization becomes certified or the entity becomes certified, but that can also be the person or the product. So why do we use assessment for accreditation and audit for certification? The definition of assessment is a process used to demonstrate that a product, service, or system meets specified requirements. Remember the term conformity assessment? Laboratories perform tests or measurements to demonstrate the items measured meet specified requirements. Accreditation bodies assess entities to demonstrate that they meet specified requirements at the required competence level. Now, when we look at the definition for audit, it is a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which audit criteria are fulfilled. That is a lengthy definition, but what it is basically saying is that an audit is documenting conformance to requirements or fulfillment of requirements. The assessment, on the other hand, is where the demonstration of competence comes into play. Now let's look at some examples of the terms in action. When we look at management system standards, remember those are like ISO 9001, ISO 27001, for example. The certification body is accredited to the conformity assessment standard ISO IEC 17021. The certification body then provides certification to companies, organizations, entities, or however named. These companies are certified to the management system standard. So accreditation relates to the certification body, certification relates to the organization or company. Looking at the same scenario for products, the product certification body obtains accreditation to ISO IEC 17065, which is a conformity assessment standard. Then, that certification body certifies products to specified requirements. The list of product certification standards is lengthy and contains a wide variety of products. The accreditation, again, is to the conformity assessment standard for the product certification body. The certification in this scenario then applies to the product. Looking at it from a service perspective, laboratories or inspection bodies are accredited to conformity assessment standards 17025 or 17020 respectively. The laboratories or inspection bodies then perform a service, such as testing, calibration, or inspection, based on validated methods or standard methods. The accreditation applies to the laboratory in this scenario. And finally, looking at it from a credentialing perspective, credentialing programs are accredited to conformity assessment standards, such as ASTM D2659 or E2659, sorry, not D, or ISO IEC 17024. The credentialing program or organization then provides certification or a certificate to persons meeting a set of requirements. Again, the accreditation applies to the credentialing program. The certificate or certification applies to the individual. We'll round out this discussion with different types of accreditations and certifications. If you think back to our types of standard slides, here we are looking at those conformity assessment standards and accreditation. Accreditation can be achieved by testing laboratories, calibration service providers, forensic service providers, inspection bodies, credentialing programs, certification bodies, and product certification bodies. These entities perform conformity assessment, again, such as testing, calibration, inspection, or certification services. Then we look at types of certification. Again, we look at those management system standards for certification of organizations, services, or processes. For persons, again, it is those certificate or certification programs that set requirements for specific types of credentials. And then product certification, which also can incorporate testing, calibration, and inspection into the certification of those related products. So in conclusion, accreditation and certification both enhance quality of systems, products, processes, and services. They both set standards to provide quality products and services. Accreditation ensures technical competence of a conformity assessment body through third-party attestation. Certification ensures conformance to requirements for organizations, products, processes, services, and persons. So before we get into your questions, I want to discuss some additional resources available for accredited organizations or organizations seeking accreditation. ANAB has many different media to further your understanding of standards, accreditation, management systems, and assessments. On the ANAB website, there are free webcasts on a variety of topics. These webcasts are 5 to 20 minutes long depending on the topic and can be viewed at any time. ANAB also has a blog page with a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standard requirements, and many other topics. We also have these monthly webinars. We are going to have one in November on the topic of training and competence. And finally, ANAB offers training in many areas, including internal auditing, standard requirements, risk, and other topics. As with assessments, training has changed significantly with the pandemic and travel restrictions. Currently, all of our traditional in-person courses are offered in online versions with an instructor. They included exercises and discussions related to the topic at hand. We also offer web-based self-paced training. All of these resources can be found on the ANAB website at anab.ansi.org. So now let's get into your questions. Remember, if you have any questions, please go ahead and submit those into the Q&A box. Okay, we did have one question come in. It says, what is the criteria to become an assessor for ANAB? Well, that question's not really related to this topic at hand, but I'll be certainly happy to discuss that with you. We have an application process where you fill out an application and it gets submitted to a review panel. And if we have a need for your expertise, then someone will reach out to you and schedule an interview. And from there, you would go through our onboarding process. Depending on the standard that you are going to be assessing to, you would need to have lead assessor training. So for 17025, you'd have to have a lead assessor training from an ILAC signatory, such as ANAB. And then you would go through an onboarding process that goes over ANAB's policies, our procedures, things like that. And then you go on an assessment to observe, and then you're observed. And so it's an organic process that takes a little bit of time to get through, but you can go to our website to find that application process. So then we had another question come in. Sorry, my screen was all jumbled up, so I didn't see them all come in, but it says, if you are accredited, do you also have to get certified, or is it one or the other? So for accreditation, remember, those are conformity assessment standards. So if it's a conformity assessment activity, there's a standard related to that, and that would be accreditation. Certification is for those management system standards. Now, I did mention that 17025, for example, does have Clause 8, which is management system requirements. And that standard does recognize that ISO 9001 could provide your management system. So if you also would like to get certified to 9001, you can do that. But again, most of these certifications and accreditations are voluntary. So it's really up to the organization to decide what management system standards they want to be certified to and what conformity assessment standards they want to be accredited to. So it's not necessarily one or the other. They're two separate buckets, so to speak, that you pull from for your management system and your technical operations. And the person that asked about the application, I will get your information from our WebEx registration and I will send you the application. Yes, you can have a copy of this presentation today. That came in a couple times. The presentation will be on our website as the video after the recording has processed through WebEx. Someone asked, do certifications have an expiry date? It depends on the certification. So most certifications do. So if you're talking about a management system certification, the certification body provides an expiration date, typically 2 years, 4 years, depending on the standard. If you're talking about a personnel certification, most of those do require some sort of ongoing education, those continuing education units or continuing education credits, where it doesn't necessarily expire, but you have to continue that education in order to maintain that credential or that certificate. So if you're talking about a training certificate that you get from an organization, typically those don't have an expiration date necessarily, but most certifications do have some sort of parameters that require you to continue maintaining that certification. All right, do we have any other questions? We did have one person ask for that web address again on that one slide, so let me go back to that web, oops, went too far, that web address here. For the additional information on conformity assessment standards and the role of ISO CASCO, I found this publication in preparation for this webinar, and it was very informative to read through that and understand what conformity assessment is. You know, we often talk about laboratories or inspection bodies or forensic service providers. We don't think about it from a conformity assessment perspective. And when you start thinking about it in that perspective, that's when you can kind of tease out what certification versus accreditation means in the conformity assessment arena. We also had a similar question come in about being certified or accredited, and can you do both? And you absolutely can. The conformity assessment standards, the 17,000 series of standards, so 17025, 17034, as they're being updated and edited into new versions, they're adding in that clause 8 that has the options, option A and option B, where the organization can be recognized for having a management system based on 9001 that also can meet the requirements of that conformity assessment standard. So that organization would say they are certified to ISO 9001 and they are accredited to 17025. So you would delineate out those two differences because one is a management system standard and the other goes that extra level. It's a higher level of achievement, a higher level of recognition for that accreditation. So the accreditation formally recognizes the competence of the organization to do those conformity assessment activities. Do you have any other questions? Those were all really great questions. Right, well, let me just get to my final slides here. Go back to the end. If you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in the questions section. So I just want to thank you all for coming to this webinar today. It was short and sweet and to the point. I hope that it provided you some additional information about the difference between accreditation and certification, the different types of standards that are out there. I only mentioned a handful in this presentation, but there are hundreds of different management system standards and conformity assessment standards that organizations can use to enhance their quality, to ensure that they're providing valid results to their customers, that their products, processes, and services are of the utmost quality, and are backed by that third-party attestation for certification, or for accreditation, excuse me, and the assurance of the auditor from a certification perspective. So if you'd like any additional information about training that ANAB offers, you can contact us at training@anab.org. If you have questions about today's webinar or about accreditation or the services that ANAB provides related to accreditation, you can send an email to anab@anab.org. That email address actually comes to me, so I would monitor those emails. I do appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to this webinar, and I thank you for coming. And that's the end of the webinar unless there are any other questions. All right, well, seeing no questions, thank you all for coming.